I said this is our seat. Move.
Is this our seat, Dad?
But I was here first.
I was here first.
She needs to move. My child deserves this seat. The father's voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin like a blade, sharp and commanding. Heads turned, eyes widened. A silence fell heavy over first class as a young black woman froze in her seat, the sting of humiliation washing over her before she could even process the demand. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring, waiting to see what she would do. But no one expected what happened next. The flight attendant stepped forward, her reply carrying a weight that would flip the entire power dynamic in seconds. What she said left not just the father speechless, but the entire plane in utter shock. It had started like any other flight, calm, routine, predictable. The engines roared, the lights above flickered, and passengers settled into their plush first-class seats, already planning how they would spend the next few hours in comfort. Among them sat Maya, a young black woman who had worked her way up through endless struggles. This seat wasn't a gift, nor was it luck. It was the result of years of determination, sacrifice, and long nights that blurred into early mornings. For her, sitting here was more than just about comfort. It was a symbol, a quiet victory, proof that she belonged in spaces so often denied to people like her. She leaned back, pulling out a worn book from her bag, ready to disappear into its pages. For a brief moment, she allowed herself the luxury of peace, unaware of the storm that was seconds away from crashing down on her. Just across the aisle, a man boarded with his young son. He carried himself with an air of entitlement that filled the cabin before his words even did. From the way he glanced at the seats, as though he owned them, to the impatience etched into his stride, it was clear this was someone used to getting what he wanted. His child tugged at his sleeve, eyeing the window seat next to Maya. And then, without hesitation, the man's voice rose. She needs to move. My child deserves this seat. The calm of the cabin shattered. Maya's book slipped from her fingers, landing silently in her lap. Every eye turned toward her, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet agreement. The air grew thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. But before Maya could even form a response, footsteps echoed down the aisle. A flight attendant approached, her expression unreadable, her presence commanding. She looked at Maya, then at the father, and then at the child. The passengers leaned forward, anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Would she force Maya to move? Would she quietly appease the father, as so often happens in moments like this? Or would she do something no one expected? The answer was about to shake the entire cabin. The demand still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. She needs to move. My child deserves this seat. It wasn't just what the father had said. It was how he said it. Loud, entitled, with the kind of tone that assumed obedience would follow. He didn't ask. He commanded. Maya sat frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She had paid for this seat, just like anyone else. She had every right to sit there, but the stares pressing down on her felt suffocating. Some passengers avoided her gaze, uncomfortable with the confrontation but unwilling to speak. Others looked at her with a subtle, quiet judgment, as if to say, why not just move and avoid the scene? The man's child tugged at his arm again, whining. The father sighed impatiently, as though Maya's very existence in that seat was an inconvenience to his world. The air around her thickened, heavy with expectation, and then came the sound of deliberate footsteps, heels striking against the carpeted floor with authority. The flight attendant stopped at their row, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. She looked at the man, then at Maya, then at the restless child. Her expression betrayed nothing, but her silence was loud enough to draw every nearby passenger into the moment. "What seems to be the issue, sir?" she asked finally, her voice even, professional. "She's in our seat," the man shot back instantly, pointing at Maya as though she were invisible, as though she were an object in the way rather than a human being. "My son wants to sit here." "Make her move," the words stung. Maya felt them burn against her skin. She wanted to shout, to protest, to tell everyone in that cabin how hard she had worked to earn her place in this world. But her voice caught in her throat, strangled by years of having to stay composed. Years of knowing how quickly anger from someone who looked like her could be twisted, spun, and used against her. The flight attendant's eyes flickered back to Maya. There was something in that look, an acknowledgement, perhaps, or a silent understanding, that gave Maya the smallest thread of strength. "Sir," the attendant said carefully, "this passenger is seated in the correct place. She will not be moving." The man blinked, momentarily stunned. It was clear he wasn't used to hearing the word no. His face hardened. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am?" Murmurs rippled through the cabin. People shifted, whispering under their breath, as the drama unfolded before their eyes like a scene on stage. The father puffed his chest, gripping his son's shoulder as though the child's mere presence was justification enough. "I spend money on first class for comfort for my family. My son deserves better than this. You're telling me she's more important than him?" The implication hung heavy. She. Not this passenger, not the lady, just she, a dismissive word. Spat out with disdain, reducing Maya to nothing more than an obstacle. Maya's stomach twisted. But she forced herself to hold still. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only armor, yet deep inside a quiet fury sparked. Why did people like him always believe they owned the world? The attendant's jaw tightened. "Sir, every passenger in this cabin has equal rights to the seat they purchased. This woman has paid for hers, and she will not be moved for your convenience. If you wish to discuss seating arrangements, I suggest you take it up with ground staff after we land." The father's face flushed red. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice rising louder than before. "I'm being discriminated against for trying to provide for my child." Gasps escaped from some passengers. The audacity of his words struck them, though few dared to speak up. A couple shook their heads in disbelief, while others pulled out their phones, screens lighting up as they began recording. The hum of quiet outrage filled the space. Maya sat there, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles ached. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the leather seat and escape the humiliation of being treated like she was undeserving. But she also wanted to stand, to fight, to demand the respect she knew she had earned. The flight attendant didn't flinch. "Sir," she said firmly, her tone sharper now, "you will lower your voice. You will take your assigned seat, or this flight will not depart until the captain has dealt with this situation." The father's eyes widened at the threat. He glanced around, realizing that the eyes of nearly every passenger were now fixed on him, not with sympathy, but with judgment. The balance of power had shifted, but he refused to let go. "You'll regret this," he spat at the attendant, before turning his glare back to Maya. "All this over a seat? You think sitting here makes you equal? You don't belong here." The words hit Maya like a slap. Her chest tightened, breath caught in her lungs. For a moment the cabin blurred, the faces of strangers dissolving into a haze. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about everything she had fought for, everything she had endured, and the cruel reminder that in some people's eyes, no matter how hard she worked, she would never be enough. But before she could react, the flight attendant leaned down slightly, her voice steady and cutting through the air with precision. "No, sir," she said. "What doesn't belong here is entitlement. This passenger is exactly where she's supposed to be. Now take your seat before you lose it entirely." A stunned silence followed. The father faltered, his lips parting as if to argue, but the weight of the eyes around him pressed harder than any words. For the first time, he seemed to realize he was outnumbered, his outrage turning into a spectacle he couldn't control. His son tugged at his sleeve again, embarrassed, urging him to sit down. Reluctantly, with a muttered curse under his breath, he yanked his son toward their assigned seats. The moment stretched, tense and unyielding, until finally the sound of them settling down broke the air. Maya exhaled slowly, though her heart still raced. The humiliation lingered, but so did something else, a flicker of strength, ignited not just by her own resilience, but by the courage of a stranger who refused to let injustice slide. And yet as the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over, because men like him rarely let go so easily. The engines rumbled beneath them as the plane taxied onto the runway, but inside the cabin, The atmosphere remained heavy, strained, and raw. Though the father had taken his seat, his anger hadn't dissolved. It simmered just beneath the surface, his eyes darting repeatedly toward Maya with a glare that could cut glass. His jaw clenched, his lips twitching in silent curses. He wasn't finished. Not yet. Maya sat still, her hands folded in her lap, willing herself not to tremble. She could feel his stare burning into her skin, trying to intimidate her into shrinking. But she kept her head high, her spine straight, even as her chest heaved quietly with every shallow breath. She told herself, "You've endured worse. Don't let him win." But endurance didn't erase humiliation. Every passenger's eyes had been witness to her being singled out, treated as though her seat was something she hadn't earned, as though she were a trespasser in first class. The echo of his words, "You don't belong here," drummed in her mind like a cruel refrain. The flight lifted off, the cabin tilting back, and for a brief moment Maya hoped the ordeal might fade into silence. Perhaps he would sulk in his seat. Perhaps passengers would turn back to their movies and champagne, and she could bury herself in her book, pretending none of it had happened. But some wounds demand to be reopened. Barely 20 minutes into the flight, the man slammed the service button above his seat with unnecessary force. The sharp ding made nearby passengers flinch. A flight attendant appeared, the same one who had defended Maya. "Yes, sir?" she asked evenly. The man's voice carried across the cabin, louder than necessary. "This is outrageous. I paid for comfort, and instead I have to sit here watching her take the seat my son should have. I want this fixed, now." The flight attendant blinked, calm as stone. "Sir, I've already explained. This passenger is rightfully in her seat. There is nothing more to fix." His face flushed again, veins rising in his neck. "Nothing more to fix?" He jabbed a finger toward Maya. "She's the reason this is happening. People like her, always taking what doesn't belong to them. And you're siding with her? Do you even understand who you're talking to?" Gasps rippled again. The ugliness of his words spilled out without restraint, no longer disguised as entitlement, but bared as something far more poisonous. Maya's chest tightened. She had heard this tone before, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in grocery stores where she had been followed by suspicious eyes. But hearing it now, shouted across first class, reopened old scars she thought had healed. The attendant's expression hardened. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice immediately." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Or what, you'll throw me off midair?" The sarcasm made a few nervous chuckles ripple through the cabin, but most passengers sat stiff, uncomfortable. They could feel the line being crossed, the cruelty sharpening. And then, just as the man leaned back in his seat with a smug grin, another voice entered the scene. Calm, low, measured. "I think I should weigh in." The entire cabin shifted. Passengers turned their heads, searching for the source. From the second row of first class, a man stood up. His suit was sharp, his demeanor commanding. His eyes were fixed on the angry father with a focus that made the air itself seem to pause. It was then that whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin. Recognition dawned on faces one by one. The man standing wasn't just any passenger, he was Judge Anthony Carter, a federal judge whose rulings had been splashed across headlines. A man known for dismantling systemic injustice with the force of law itself. The father blinked, his bravado faltering for the first time. "And who are you?" he asked, though the stammer in his voice betrayed the fact that he already knew. Judge Carter stepped into the aisle, his voice steady but piercing. "I am someone who has spent my career listening to people like you. Men who believe their money, their skin, or their status gives them the right to belittle others. And I am telling you, here and now, that this behavior ends today." The cabin fell into complete silence. Not even the hum of the engines seemed audible. The father tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous. You're really going to lecture me over a seat?" But the judge's stare cut through him. "No, this isn't about a seat. It's about dignity. It's about the belief that a black woman has less right to exist in this space than you do. And I won't sit quietly while you try to strip her of that." Every passenger leaned forward, riveted. Phones were up again, recording, capturing every word. The father squirmed in his seat, suddenly aware that he was no longer in control of the narrative. The judge continued, his tone sharpening. "You've embarrassed your son. You've embarrassed yourself, and you've reminded every person in this cabin why racism, dressed up as entitlement, is still alive today. But let me assure you, it will not win. Not here. Not now. The man's son looked away, shame on his young face. The father's mouth opened as if to argue, but no sound came. The weight of the moment pressed down too heavily. And then, with deliberate finality, Judge Carter pulled out his phone, dialing quickly. The father's eyes widened, realizing what was happening. "This isn't just going to vanish when we land," the judge said. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the airline, with the FAA, and with every authority that matters. Your words won't be forgotten. Your actions won't be erased. Consider your behavior documented, and your future permanently marked." The father's bravado collapsed. His face drained of color. Around him, passengers erupted, not in laughter, not in ridicule, but in applause. A slow, steady clap that grew louder, stronger, filling the cabin with unity. Maya sat frozen, tears pricking her eyes. For the first time in the long, humiliating ordeal, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, not shame, not fear, but vindication. Someone had spoken the truth aloud, with authority, with power. The father slumped back into his seat, defeated. His child buried his face in his hands. The applause swelled, echoing off the cabin walls, and for once Maya didn't shrink beneath the stares. She sat taller, her head high, her presence undeniable. For in that moment, the world had shifted. The humiliation she had endured had been transformed into a declaration. She belonged here, and nothing he could say would ever take that away again. The cabin eventually quieted, but the energy that lingered was electric, like the hush after a thunderstorm, when the air is thick and heavy, but the world feels somehow different. Maya sat in her seat, heart still racing, palms damp against her skirt. She replayed the scene in her head, almost disbelieving it had unfolded so publicly, so fiercely. For years, she had taught herself how to shrink in spaces where she wasn't welcome, board meetings, luxury lounges, even the quiet of boutique stores where eyes followed her too closely. But this time, in this skyborne capsule, she hadn't been left to stand alone. Someone had stepped forward. Someone had spoken with such force, such authority, that her worth had been validated before dozens of witnesses. The judge settled back into his seat, his face calm, almost unreadable, but Maya caught his eye for a brief second. He gave her the smallest of nods, silent, powerful. It said, "You're seen. You're not alone," passengers whispered in hushed tones. A woman across the aisle leaned toward Maya, her voice gentle. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. You don't deserve it." Another, a businessman in a navy blazer, offered her a smile and added, "For what it's worth, he won't forget what just happened. None of us will." The father, however, sat in brooding silence. His son, red-cheeked with embarrassment, refused to look at him. The arrogance that had dripped from every word earlier seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind only a shadow of a man, cornered and exposed. The flight attendants continued their work, but with a different energy now, firm, deliberate, almost protective of Maya as they passed her row. Each small gesture was a wordless affirmation. "We've got your back." Hours passed. The plane glided through clouds, the city lights below blinking like scattered gems. And yet, for Maya, this wasn't just another flight. It was a turning point. When they landed, the applause from earlier still echoed in her ears. The passengers filed out slowly, but not before several stopped to offer her nods, smiles, or quiet words of support. Phones remained in hands, screens glowing with the videos they had captured. Maya suspected those recordings would find their way into the digital world soon enough. At the gate, Judge Carter approached her. His presence seemed to silence the bustling terminal for a moment. "You handled yourself with dignity," he told her, his voice steady. "Don't ever let anyone make you question your place in this world." Maya's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." The judge smiled faintly. "Sometimes all it takes is..." Meanwhile, the father was met by airline officials at the terminal. Their faces were stern, their clipboards ready. Passengers who had recorded the incident stood nearby, offering their footage as evidence. The man's shoulders sagged as reality pressed in. His tantrum at 30,000 feet had not gone unnoticed, and the world was about to hold him accountable. But for Maya, the real resolution wasn't in watching his downfall. It was in feeling the strength that surged within her as she walked through the terminal, head high, steps firm. She no longer felt invisible, no longer carried the weight of shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. That night, alone in her hotel room, she opened her phone and saw the headlines already spreading. Father explodes at black woman in first class. Judge Carter intervenes mid-flight. Clips of the confrontation had already gone viral. Comment sections filled with outrage, solidarity, and words of encouragement for Maya. She set her phone down, her heart swelling. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though her existence wasn't just endured, but defended, recognized, and somewhere deep inside, she promised herself, never again would she let someone steal her place. Not in first class, not in the world,